They thought she was lost. They thought she was confused. They thought the elegant woman standing in the lobby of the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, still wearing the desert dust of 3 combat deployments on the edges of her luggage tags, was someone who had wandered in from the wrong terminal. They were wrong about all of it. It was a Thursday evening in late October, the kind of Atlanta night where the heat hasn't fully surrendered to autumn yet. When Colonel Serena Adeyemi-Okafor stepped off a military transport that had connected through Ramstein Air Base in Germany, through Dulles in Virginia, and finally into Atlanta where her daughter was waiting. 22 years of active service with the United States Army, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 commendation from the Secretary of Defense, and tonight, all she wanted was a hot shower, a plate of her daughter's jollof rice, and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep on a mattress that didn't vibrate with the hum of a transport aircraft. Serena was 51 years old, and she carried herself the way people do when they've spent 2 decades making life or death decisions before breakfast. She wasn't loud about it. She didn't need to be. There was a stillness in her posture, a precision in the way she moved through a crowded terminal that tended to make people instinctively step aside. She wore civilian clothes, a well-fitted charcoal blazer, dark slacks, simple pearl earrings. Her carry-on bag had a small embroidered patch on the side, the kind that military families sew on for sentimental reasons. It read, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, her late husband's unit. She never took it off. She had just cleared customs and was moving toward the ground transportation exit when she realized she'd taken the wrong elevator down. The signage in the international terminal had changed since her last rotation stateside, and she'd come up in the premium lounge corridor instead of the main concourse. She checked her phone, got her bearings, and turned to backtrack through the corridor. That was when Security Officer Dale, his name badge read D. Croft, spotted her. Croft was the kind of man who had worked the same corridor for 6 years and had developed a very particular theory about who belonged in it. The premium lounge corridor served first-class international passengers and holders of certain elite status cards. It was carpeted, the lighting was warm, the chairs were leather, and according to Croft's internal calculus, the woman in the charcoal blazer with the worn military patch on her bag did not fit the picture he had assembled in his head. He stepped in front of her. "Ma'am." The word came out the way it sometimes does, not as a courtesy, but as a roadblock. "This corridor is for premium passengers and lounge members only. Can I see your boarding pass?" Serena stopped. She had just spent 19 hours in transit. She had slept, collectively, perhaps 3 of those hours. She looked at Croft the way a person looks at a speed bump they didn't expect on a road they've driven 1,000 times. "I came out of the wrong elevator," she said, her voice even, unhurried. "I'm just cutting back through to the main terminal. I still need to see your boarding pass." She considered explaining further. She decided not to. She reached into her blazer pocket and produced her boarding pass, the military priority travel document issued by the Department of Defense, which looked different from a commercial ticket because it was a fact that was printed clearly across the top of the document in block letters. Official U.S. Military Travel Order. Croft looked at it. His expression didn't change. "What is this?" "Military travel document," Serena said. "I flew in on a dodgy charter connection." Croft tilted his head the way people do when they've already decided on an answer and are just looking for the right framing to deliver it. He got on his radio. He spoke quietly, the way people do when they don't want the subject of the conversation to hear what they're saying about her. Serena stood still. She placed her carry-on on the floor beside her feet. She had stood in front of improvised explosive device briefings. She had delivered casualty notifications to Gold Star families. She had sat in forward operating bases in 118-degree heat and written after-action reports while mortars fell 2 kilometers away. Dale Croft and his radio were not going to rattle her. Within 4 minutes, 2 Atlanta airport police officers arrived. One was young, maybe 24, with the nervous energy of someone who had recently graduated from the academy and was still figuring out how much authority he actually held. The other was older. His name tag read Bouchard. He had the comfortable arrogance of a man who had worked the same beat long enough to believe he had seen everything. "Ma'am," Bouchard said, "we're going to need you to step over here with us." "I'm happy to talk to you," Serena said. "I was just explaining to your colleague that I ended up in this corridor by mistake, and I'm heading back to the main terminal." We have a report that you may not have valid access credentials for this area. I showed him my military travel document. That doesn't automatically grant lounge access. I'm not trying to access the lounge, Serena said, each word measured. I am trying to exit the building. Bouchard's jaw tightened. He glanced at Croft, who gave a small, subtle nod, the kind of nod that communicated I told you she'd be difficult. Can I see some ID, ma'am? Serena produced her military ID. The card was government issue, laminated, and her rank printed clearly. COL, US Army, Colonel. Serena Adeyemi-Okafor. Bouchard held it. He looked at it, the way people look at something they recognize, but don't want to acknowledge, because acknowledgement would require changing course, and changing course would require admitting they'd started down the wrong road. You're a colonel, the younger officer said. He couldn't help himself. The surprise in his voice was genuine, unfiltered. He hadn't meant for it to sound the way it did. 22 years, Serena said. Bouchard handed the ID back. He hadn't softened. We're still going to need you to come with us to the security office while we verify. Verify what exactly? Verify that this document is authentic. There it was, the escalation point. The moment that, had it been anyone else, had she been a different kind of tired, a younger officer, a civilian without the specific institutional knowledge to understand exactly what was being said to her, might have cracked something. The implication wasn't subtle. Your document might be fake. You might be pretending. Serena looked at Bouchard for 3 long seconds. Around them, business travelers moved past in the corridor, rolling luggage behind them, glancing over with that particular look that people in airports give to scenes they don't want to be part of. A mother shepherding 2 children pulled them slightly wider around the group. A man in a suit looked at Serena, then at the officers, then very deliberately at his watch, as if time were suddenly more interesting than what was unfolding in front of him. I'll come with you, Serena said. But I want to be very clear that I am doing so voluntarily, and I want you to note that in whatever log you're keeping, that's fine, Bouchard said. And I'd like to make one phone call before we go. You can make calls from the office. I'd like to make it now. Bouchard hesitated. She was already dialing. Her daughter, Lieutenant Imani Adeyemi, answered on the second ring. She was waiting in the arrivals hall downstairs, 2 floors below, holding a handwritten sign that read "Welcome Home," Mom in capital letters, because she knew her mother didn't like small gestures. Mama? I'm right downstairs, Imani. Serena's voice was quiet, precise. I need you to call Fort McPherson. Ask for Major Delgado. Tell him I said Kestrel is down. A pause on the line. Mama, what? He'll know what it means. Go now. She hung up. She looked at Bouchard. She picked up her carry-on. Lead the way, she said. The security office was a beige room with 2 chairs, a desk, a monitor, and the particular fluorescent lighting that seemed to have been specifically engineered to make everyone inside it look vaguely guilty. Croft came with them. He stood near the door, arms crossed, with the posture of a man expecting to be vindicated. Bouchard sat down at the monitor. He typed Serena's name into the system. The younger officer, Reyes, his tag read, stood to the side, and he was doing the thing young officers sometimes do in rooms like this, where they're quietly reassessing everything. He had looked at that military ID card. He had looked at her carry-on patch. He was doing math in his head. Bouchard hit enter. The system loaded. What came back was not the profile of a woman with questionable travel documents. What came back was the service record of Colonel Serena Adeyemi-Okafor, United States Army, currently assigned to U.S. Army Forces Command, a position that, if Bouchard had known enough to understand what he was reading, meant she oversaw training readiness for tens of thousands of active duty soldiers. Below that, the summary of her decorations. Below that, a security clearance level that turned the younger officer's face a very specific shade of pale. Bouchard stared at the screen. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Ma'am, Reyes said, before Bouchard could organize a response. I want to apologize, officer. Serena didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way she might redirect a young soldier who was about to fill the silence with the wrong words. Let your supervisor speak first. Bouchard cleared his throat. He was a man in the process of understanding that the ground had shifted under him and the recalibration was not going smoothly. Colonel Adeyemi-Okafor, he began. It's Adeyemi-Okafor, she said, the correct pronunciation patient unhurried. Yes. Colonel The door to the security office opened. The man who stepped through it was wearing the uniform of an army major, and he had the expression of someone who, had driven very quickly from a very short distance away. He was followed by a woman in a dark blue airport administration blazer, who was holding a tablet and a phone simultaneously, as though she needed both to contain whatever situation she had been told she was walking into. Major Delgado looked at Serena first. "Colonel," he said, and the word carried all the weight it was supposed to carry. "I came as fast as I could." "You made good time," Serena said. He looked at Bouchard. He looked at Croft. He looked at the screen, which was still displaying Serena's service record, with the mild indifference of a systems that had simply been asked a question and answered it honestly. "Who authorized this detention?" Delgado asked. Bouchard straightened. "It wasn't a detention. It was a voluntary. I asked to note that I was coming voluntarily," Serena said. "Precisely, because I knew there would be a conversation about what to call it." Delgado turned to the airport administrator, a woman named Ms. Hartwell, whose expression suggested she was already composing an internal memo in her head. "I'm going to need your incident log for the last 40 minutes. "Of course," Hartwell said. "And the corridor camera footage." "Yes. And the name of the individual who initiated the call to airport police." Croft, near the door, shifted his weight slightly. "Just slightly. There's a protocol," Bouchard started. "There is," Delgado agreed. "And I'm going to need documentation showing that protocol was followed, including the point at which a military identification card, issued by the Department of Defense, was presented, and the decision made to disregard it." The room had that specific silence that falls when everyone in it has arrived at the same understanding, at approximately the same time, and no one quite knows who should speak next. Serena stood up. She picked up her carry-on. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder so that the embroidered patch was visible. Her late husband's unit, the one she'd sewn on herself the year after he didn't come home from his third deployment. She looked at Croft, who was looking at the floor. She looked at Bouchard, who was looking at the monitor. She looked at Reyes, who was looking at her, the way young officers sometimes look at someone who has just shown them something they will carry with them for the rest of their career. She didn't raise her voice. She never had to. "I have been in this country's service since I was 28 years old," Serena said. "I buried my husband while wearing this country's uniform. I raised my daughter in base housing across 4 states while deploying twice in 3 years. I've spent the last 14 months in a country whose name most people in this room couldn't find on a map, working to keep this nation's interests intact. And tonight, all I wanted to do was go home." She paused. "I understand that people make assumptions. I understand that a woman who looks like me, carrying luggage like mine, in a corridor like that one, doesn't fit someone's picture. But I need you to understand something." She looked at Croft directly. "The picture is wrong. It has always been wrong. And the next time you decide that someone doesn't belong somewhere, I would encourage you to ask yourself how certain you are. Because certainty, in my experience, is the most dangerous thing a person can carry." She turned to Major Delgado. "Walk me out?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. They left together, the colonel and the major, moving back through the corridor with the quiet authority of people who had long since stopped needing anyone's permission to occupy the spaces they walked through. Behind them, the airport administrator was still typing. Reyes was still standing against the wall, not entirely sure what he'd just witnessed, but very certain he would not forget it. Bouchard sat at the monitor, looking at the service record that had turned a routine stop into something he would be explaining to his supervisor for the next several weeks. And Croft was still looking at the floor. Downstairs in the arrivals hall, Serena Adeyemi was still holding her sign. She saw her mother emerge from the elevator before Serena saw her, and she crossed the hall at a near run, the sign crumpling against her mother's shoulder when they embraced. She was 26 years old and an active duty lieutenant, and in that moment she held on like she was 12 again, and her mother had just come home from somewhere far away. "What happened?" Imani whispered. "Nothing that hasn't happened before," Serena said quietly, holding her daughter, "and nothing I couldn't handle." They stood there for a moment, in the middle of the arrivals hall, the two of them, while travelers moved around them with their rolling bags and their reunions and their exhaustion. Then Serena pulled back, looked at her daughter's face, and smiled. A real smile, the one she didn't give to rooms or reporters or review boards, only to people. "Now," she said, picking up her bag, "tell me there's jollof rice at the end of this night." Imani laughed, the tension breaking like a held breath finally released. "I started it before I left the house. Good, Serena said. Let's go home. The investigation that followed was thorough. Hartwell's internal review, combined with the corridor footage and the incident log, confirmed that a valid Department of Defense military identification card had been presented and subsequently deemed insufficient grounds to release a decorated combat officer from a security hold, a decision for which the airport's parent organization issued a formal written apology to Colonel Adeyemi-Okafor and to U.S. Army Forces Command Security Officer D. Croft was removed from the premium corridor and reassigned to a role that did not involve independent assessment of passenger credentials, pending a review of prior incidents that, once investigators started pulling the thread, turned out to be a longer list than anyone had expected. Officer Bouchard remained on duty, but was required to complete additional cultural competency and military liaison training, a requirement his supervisor described in the memo as non-negotiable and long overdue. Rise requested a transfer to a unit that worked more frequently with veteran travelers. He was approved, and on a Tuesday 3 weeks after that October evening, a framed copy of Serena's commendation letter from the Secretary of Defense arrived at her daughter's house. Imani had ordered it, custom framed, matted in gold, hung it in the hallway, next to a photo of her father in uniform, and below it, Imani taped a handwritten note that read, "This is who you stopped at the airport." No one who visited that house ever asked what it meant. It has always been easy to look at someone and decide you know their story. It takes something rarer, a kind of practiced humility, the willingness to hold your certainty loosely, to understand that the picture in your head might be wrong. Colonel Serena Adeyemi-Okafor didn't need anyone's validation that night. She never had. But the people who stopped her did need something. The chance to be shown, clearly and without cruelty, the cost of the assumptions they'd been carrying unchallenged for years. She gave them that. She didn't have to. That's the thing about people who have actually earned their authority. They rarely need to prove it. They simply stand in the light, and eventually the light does the work. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. Do you think accountability like this happens often enough, or is this the exception rather than the rule? Subscribe to Echoes of Justice so you don't miss the next story. Because there are more. There are always more, and every single one of them deserves to be heard.